Hi, everyone. It's Janice from the Divorcing Religion podcast. I'm excited to tell you that my book is now for sale. It's called Divorcing Religion, a memoir and survival handbook. And I'll make sure you have a link in the notes for that. And also, I want to encourage you to like, subscribe, and become a member of my YouTube channel. Take care. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Divorcing Religion podcast. I'm your host, Janice SELBIE. I'm a registered professional counselor and a religious trauma recovery coach. You are joining me for part 2 of my interview with certified sex, relationship, and intimacy coach and sex kink educator, Lacey Bond, also known as IntimacyLacey. And before we go any further, I do want to give you a content warning in case you haven't guessed. Today, we will be having frank discussions about sex. Okay, continuing. Based in Los Angeles, Lacey is dedicated to helping people heal from purity culture, growing healthy relationships with other people, and developing awesome, shame-free sexuality. I love it. Lacey lived the quintessential purity culture experience, raised in the evangelical church and youth group, Bible study, and Christian school, graduated from Biola University, and then featured in the 2015 documentary, Give Me Sex, Jesus. And she's here to tell you that all of us can heal from it. Wow. Welcome back, Lacey. I'm glad you could join me again.
Thank you. Me too. I'm really excited for our part 2.
I had, after we finished talking last day, I just thought there was so much more that we could get into around sex and sexuality, and it's such a fun and juicy topic. So let's dive right in. I know when we first connected today, you mentioned something interesting about a podcast that you had listened to recently, and tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I was listening to an older episode of Justin J. Lehmiller's podcast, Sex and Psychology. Lehmiller is the author of Tell Me What You Want, which is a book on sexual fantasy based on his survey, because he works with the Kinsey Institute. His survey on sexual fantasy in the U.S., 4,000 person survey, largest of its kind. His research and his content are all amazing, but this particular episode goes into the impact that religion has on a person's sexuality and not just like in terms of orientation, but the whole spectrum of their sexuality, their sexual health, the way they interact and relate with other people, their ability to communicate, their feelings of positivity, negativity, shame, or acceptance around it. It's about an hour long, and let me grab the name of the expert that was on there, because this is his whole zone of expertise, and I want to make sure that he gets a shout out. Dr. Eric Sprankle. So,
I know Eric. I know Eric Sprankle through Dr. Daryl Ray of Recovering from Religion.
Fantastic. So, yeah, I should not even be surprised, but yeah, Eric has been on Lehmiller's podcast a bunch. And so I was just kind of brushing up on that episode, which I've listened to before, since we were going to be talking about this intersection today. But it kind of comes down to whether your identity and values and way you are aligns with the morality that you identify with, the belief system, the value system, the religion. And it talks about how overall a lot of religions, and particularly Christianity, have a very narrow view of human sexuality, where it is only acceptable within the context of penis and vagina penetrative intercourse within a heterosexual marriage, which is a very, very small segment of the pie, or the sphere, if you want to get full 3D about it, that makes up the full gamut of human sexual identity and expression. So essentially, it kind of comes down to how a person feels about their identity and desires in the context of how well that aligns with their belief system, which is kind of, that's kind of how your comfort with your sexuality is anyway. But in terms of, being in a high control religion that has that very narrow view of sexuality, if your identity or desires diverge from that at all, it creates moral incongruence. And typically, moral incongruence is more the issue for people who identify as having sexual issues who come from a religious context like that.
Mm-hmm.
It is the same thing that presents in the phenomena where Christian men self-report to a much higher degree porn addiction, despite
Right, you got your
using...
air quotes going there, porn
Yeah.
addiction, yeah.
we can. I don't recall if we got into that on the last one, but I can. It's a bugbear. Because they actually consume far less porn than people who don't self-identify. And they also, there's actually some really great episodes on Leigh Miller's podcast, on the Sex and Psychology podcast, about porn and sex addiction, because the same thing happens. It is more an issue that the way you are is totally fine by scientific and statistical objective data. However, your belief system tells you that you are wrong for being that way or thinking that way or wanting that. And that can be, same-sex attraction, wanting to do stuff besides PIV intercourse, like hand stuff, mouth stuff, butt stuff, if you're Mark Driscoll. That's my favorite part of Real Marriage. That he's like, it's fine. Like, okay, the one, all right, I guess. I mean, yeah, I agree. But that's kind of the gist of that, and that a lot of it comes down to shame. And I was also, I'm kind of finishing up that book that we talked about on the last section, Recovering from Purity Culture by Dr. Camden Morgante, that I think you and I both have kind of like mixed feelings on, just because clearly we're on the Divorcing Religion podcast, and her work comes from a place of preserving your faith identity and shifting. Her whole thing is shifting from purity culture to purity. So still operating in that very narrow area, maybe like a little bit less narrow, a little bit more expansive, but removing the shame. And so, on that front, I am all for reducing and removing shame, especially when, as is so often the case, it's coming from a high control religion in a dominant theology and doctrine that is not the only doctrine or theology that you can have, even in that faith.
Right. And I'm often I'm reminded of Dr. Darrell Ray's book, Sex and God. And he wrote that book a number of years ago, and I still feel like it's on point today. And when you were just talking about men self-reporting as being, and I've got my air quotes going now, sex addicts or porn addicts or whatever. And so much of that can just come from even potentially a man feeling shamed by his partner because his partner is religious and saying, well, if you're even looking at porn, if you're even watching porn, you're cheating on me. You're cheating on me. And that's so sad. I think because that's very limiting. And I think if people are having that response and reaction, I would definitely encourage them to reach out to a therapist and do some work on their relationship. But a lot of it is, if you're still stuck and entrenched in religion, that's what's guiding you. That's what's driving you. And there's so much more to life than that. So, okay. Yeah. So you're always listening to podcasts and reading books about sex and sexuality, just keeping on top of those things so that you really have your finger on the pulse of what's going on in that community. Can you talk a little bit today about, because we touched on it last time, I think, about consent and coercion, because I know you also help folks out with risk mitigation in the context of kink. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So the idea of consent is kind of broadly understood to be saying yes to sex. And that is part of it, but it's a little bit more granular and expansive than that. And it doesn't just apply to sex. Like when we talk about bodily autonomy, consenting to having someone touch you in any type of way, even if it's like the very common example of little kids feeling pressured, to give a hug or something to an older relative, which is a really common one that comes up. And when you're talking about bodily sovereignty, no one has the right to touch you or do anything to you without your consent. And in the context of sex and in BDSM, a fuller understanding of consent is really important, especially if you are engaging in any type of riskier play. You need to understand what it is you're consenting to. And that's where sex education comes in, and, general education. I'm gonna talk a lot about sex because that is more my purview. I want to have listeners have the baseline understanding that BDSM and kink do not always include sex, and often usually are actually not about the sex. They are about the power exchange and the taboo, which may or may not include sex. Like we talk about kink being, or BDSM being, adult play. Sex is fun, and 99% of adults are allosexual, meaning they are willing to or enjoy having sex. I can get into the variances in like demisexual and asexual, allosexual in a second here. But if you're an adult and you're playing, sex is fun. And most people have a libido that is gonna, give them the sex drive and make them want to have sex. But the fundamental idea of consent for me is that your body is your own, and it makes it difficult to kind of navigate consent when you come from a religion that tells you your body is not your own, whether it's telling you that it's your future spouse's or that it's God's. And even if you believe that like your body is God's, he still gave it to you, and no one else has the right to abuse you or do anything to you without consent. So I define consent as an ongoing mutual agreement that certain things may happen. It applies more to sex, to more than just sex. But in sexual play and BDSM, it requires an understanding of your own bodies and boundaries that can only be obtained through self-exploration and examination, both of which are discouraged by purity culture, as we have said. You don't need to understand everything about yourself or your subconscious to engage in kinky play or sex. Like, exploring is fun, but a baseline understanding of what you're comfortable with, and maybe more importantly, what you're not comfortable with, is required to engage in healthy play, whether it's kinky or risky or not. So informed consent is a big part of this. My favorite consent acronym is FRIES, which stands for freely given, reversible, informed, enthusiastic, and specific. So freely given, this is where coercion comes in. It shouldn't be coerced, pressured, or forced in any way. You can't coerce someone into giving in and just call it consent. That's coercion, abuse, assault. Being in an altered state of mind also impacts your ability to give informed consent or have it be given freely, because your state of mind is not present. It's not sober. Obviously, people do play under the influence, and that's where getting into a stronger understanding of consent comes in. So reversible, you can withdraw your consent even if you said yes to a previous activity or earlier on in the evening. This is where marital rape can come into, where it's like, well, we're married, so like we have blanket consent. No, you don't. You still have to respect your partner's autonomy. And then informed obviously means you need to understand what you're agreeing to. Everyone involved knows what they're getting into. And if there's an element of novelty or surprise, you know what the limits are. In kink and BDSM, we talk about hard and soft limits. A hard limit is something you absolutely will not do. And that can be penetration. That can be certain terms like, I don't want to be called a slut ever. I don't want to be degraded. I don't want to be tickled, etc. And a soft limit is something that requires negotiation or should not be introduced without prior negotiation. It's something that you are willing to do under certain circumstances, whether those circumstances are I have to be the one to initiate it, or it has to only happen in this context. Like I'm only comfortable with you going down on me if we both showered. I'm only comfortable with, penetrative sex if I know that my partner has just showered and like is clean. Those are like just very basic health and safety ones, but another one could be I'm comfortable being called a slut if we've talked about it first, but don't just introduce that to me like the first time we're playing, because people have triggers and you don't want to trigger people when you're having sex or engaging in kink. And then enthusiastic, this is also an area that requires a granular understanding because there is a consensual or simulated non-consent element in some types of kinky play, but generally, consent should be given with genuine excitement and desire and not out of obligation or pressure, which reinforces that freely given piece. Enthusiasm can become complex if we're discussing CNC, consensual non-consent, but it's important in that aspect to understand that that should be happening in a negotiated container of play where you're co-creating it with that dominance and submission and negotiation framework. So if you're engaging in like free use, blanket consent, simulated abduction, or like primal hunt play where you're playing as a less than enthusiastic participant, understanding that that is all you are doing and you can stop, safe word, use, the traffic light system. Red means stop, yellow means pause or slow down, green means we're good to go without like breaking the immersion of your play. You just need to understand that you are playing and you need to be enthusiastic about the game you are planning to play when you negotiate its rules. And then specificity means that consent to one activity doesn't imply consent to the other. Often people think about sex as this very blanket all or nothing thing where sex can include anything around penetrative intercourse. But agreeing to one thing, like you can kiss me, doesn't mean that you can also go down on me. Understanding exactly what you're agreeing to do or not do, what's on and off the table, what are the limits that are not to be crossed? That also ties back in with informed. And that kind of ongoing consent things means that, whether it's in marriage or in a casual situation or dating, just because you consented to something, sex overall, or a specific thing, last week, doesn't mean that you are down to do so again. So that's
right. And
my TED Talk on consent.
That's excellent. Thank you so much for that. And I would also just like to throw in there the idea that it's not acceptable and it's not consent if one partner keeps badgering the other partner. Come on. I want to do this. Why don't you ever want to do this? What's wrong with you? You're frigid. You're cold. This is the third night in a row you've turned me down. Like that is badgering. And it's unacceptable. If you have to be badgering someone to get them to agree to have sex with you, don't keep doing that. That is not showing respect for your partner. Yes, coercion, exactly. And then the other thing I wanted to make sure people have a very good understanding of is even if the partner says yes and you get started and things seem to be moving along fine, if that partner says, no, stop, it hurts, wait, any of those things, you stop immediately what you're doing and you check in with that person, because consent can be withdrawn even during the act itself. So I just want to make that very, very plain. And I'm saying that also from the background of being an ex-Christian woman who was trained, raised to be a wife that would, submit and obey and all those sorts of things. So where I maybe didn't really feel that I had much of a voice or that what I wanted mattered in different situations. So I just want to encourage people to claim their autonomy and agency and use their voice in this. situations. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, that's exactly right. As I was speaking, I was kind of referring back to a blog that I'd written about consent. And in my paragraph after the fries, I touch on this because ongoing communication is key for consent. It's not enough to get consent once at the beginning of interaction. You have to check in, reobtain, double check, like pay attention to your partner, their body language. Some people do go nonverbal during sex, and like being able to understand that about yourself to communicate it to a partner, and being able to understand that that does happen to people, whether it's because they're triggered or because they just have this programming that once, you're having sex, especially like as a woman, and like your male partner it's for him and it's for what he wants, and it's about keeping him satisfied so he doesn't wander and, well, I'm gonna throw up. No, like you expressed that super well, and like that's why I talk so much about consent and about developing a broader understanding of consent, because it's more than just yes or no. It's more expansive.
I've had male partners tell me that I'm too noisy when I have sex, that I'm not noisy enough when I have sex, that my breasts are too large. Like I just, it's mind blowing to me, because I would not dream of commenting on someone's body, someone that I was in an intimate situation with, other than how much I'm enjoying it, and it's, I guess it's, we can also potentially negotiate ahead of time, or let the person know I'm pretty loud when it comes to sex. So maybe if your kids are home, maybe we should go to a hotel or something like this. Those are things maybe that can be discussed ahead of time too. What do you think about that?
Yeah, totally. Communicating about sex is both really important and often really hot, because the full range of human sexuality is so broad. I think with this all or nothing mindset that people often have, they can think that like talking about it makes it like less sexy or less like novel. But if you're talking about like, okay, like if we're going to get into this, like, here's some stuff to know about me. Let me hand you the user manual. This is how I like to be touched, or like, this is how I get off, or I am loud. Like, let's plan for that. Communicating about sex. I mean, some people even will kind of frame it as a part of foreplay, where the typical understanding of foreplay is like all the stuff you do before PIV, which is very narrow, because what if neither of you has a dick? Is everything sapphics do just foreplay?
Right.
But like having those conversations can, kind of keep you in a sexy mindset, keep you thinking about your partner, thinking about, creative ideas of how you might want to play. And it's just good overall for having an ongoing shared understanding of both of your proclivities and needs and things to keep in mind. Whether it is an ongoing relationship or something more casual, where you might say, hey, heads up, before we get started, here's some stuff to keep in mind. And that's where knowing yourself is also really important.
Yes. And so then also let me throw out there for everybody, I guess maybe more so for people who are getting married maybe for the first time, and they might even be a little bit on the younger side. If you have a notion in your head that you will be having sex every night with your partner, you can just let that fantasy go, because I think reality is often different. And some folks have a higher libido, and some folks have just even more energy. If someone's been working all day or with children all day or whatever's going on with them, they may even be interested and very attracted to you, but they may just be too freaking tired. And so I wanted to put that out there, but also, since I am in my 50s, and so have some more understanding about aging and what happens with your body as you get older. When we're younger, we might tend to really want spontaneity. And when you're getting older, That's not always possible because the blood flow doesn't, it's not the same in men, I'm thinking of specifically as they age. And so that's where they may need to take a pill. They may need to use cock rings to keep things hard, and so you can't be quite as spontaneous all the time, I'll say, when you're getting older. But that does not mean that it still cannot be very hot and very enjoyable. But I just want people to know that this is part of reality as we're aging.
Yeah, it is. And you can still have elements of novelty and surprise, especially if you are able to communicate about the things that you like. One of the top elements of sexual fantasy is novelty. And like I said, the whole range is very expansive. And, when you know a partner or whether you know them deeply from like an ongoing relationship, or if you're just both really good at explaining, this is all the stuff I'm into. Like some people actually keep like kink inventories of the types of play that they like to do. There's bdsmtest.org, which is an inventory quiz that you can take that'll spit out where you fall on a dozen different axes of like flavors of kinky play. And
is this a yes, no, maybe list?
Basically, yeah. So a yes, no, maybe list, which is a list of things that it's kind of self-explanatory, things that you want to do or try, things that you don't want to do or try, and maybes that I'm open to it. Very similar to soft and hard limits. A no is a hard limit. A maybe is fairly analogous to a soft limit. And there's also stuff that you can do that does not require an erect penis. There is a unlimited range of adult toys that you can use for penetration, that you can use for external vibration, you can use for internal vibration, whatever anatomy you have, that can be part of that playtime, which can also take the pressure off of an assigned male partner who has a penis, that like, okay, this is not the be all end all, like it's okay if I'm not hard. And like, especially in America, we have a very penis centric view of sex, to the point where most people, if you ask them to define sex, it's like, well, the penis goes in the vagina and you thrust until the man comes. Which is why there's such a pronounced orgasm gap for women. And or assigned female at birth people who have vaginas and clitorises. Clitori? Clitorati? So yeah, like as you age and your energy changes or your physiology changes, or if you become disabled, like disabled sex as a disabled person is another area of interest for me. And it's an area where toys can become like really important, especially if, you may have, chronic pain or chronic hand pain or like repetitive stress injury or carpal tunnel. Like hand stuff gets challenging if you can't just like use your hands all willy-nilly.
Yeah, that's true. Thanks for bringing that up, because disabled people still be liking sex, still be wanting to connect.
We're still people
with each other. Yes, exactly.
Sex is generally part of the human experience. It's kind of necessary for the race, the species to continue. Ooh, now is probably a good time to get into like the asexual to allosexual spectrum.
Yes, let's talk about the spectrums.
Yeah. So in terms of libido or sex drive, you have on one end, probably the most common generally just being allosexual, which means you have a sex drive and you like having sex. And then on the other end of that is asexuality. And then gray ace and like demisexuality kind of fall like closer to that end. Asexuality means that you either do not have, I like how it like told me I raised my hand, girl.
I know.
Asexuality means that you either don't really have a libido or you don't care much about sex, and you can be, some asexual people are sex repulsed, which means like they just they don't want anything to do with it, whether it's a sensory issue, whether it's trauma, whether it's just, meh, I'm not into it. I don't like sex. I don't like sushi. It's just whatever. Like, it doesn't really matter why. The fact is that person's not here for sex, and that's fine. There's plenty of ways to be intimate emotionally or physically or whatever type of intimacy that you want to have, like a fulfilling situation where like needs are met. Gray sexual, kind of means that you're somewhere in that zone, but you may be more flexible when it comes to having sex. Maybe you're fine masturbating, but you don't like playing sexually with other people. Maybe you're fine having sex in certain circumstances. Demisexuality, which is where I tend to identify, means that generally you need to have an emotional or trusting like connection with a person to either experience sexual attraction, because this is about sexual attraction as well as like your actual libido, because there's different types of attraction: platonic, romantic, sexual, aesthetic. Wow, that person looks cool. Oh my God, I'm obsessed. Very common in queer culture, just like aesthetic. So demisexuality, is getting a little bit closer towards like the allosexual end of this spectrum. However wide you want to make it. It's asexual, gray ace, demisexual. And for me, I identify as demi not because of libido, but more because of comfort and trust with people. Maybe that comes from purity culture holdovers. I don't know. It doesn't matter. The fact is, like, okay, this is how I identify. This is what it means. It means that, like, if I'm going to consider someone, I would need to feel a sense of emotional closeness and like trust with that person. Some people identify as demi more because they just don't even experience like sexual attraction at all unless they have already got that type of connection with the person. And then if we go like a little bit further to on that allosexual, I mean, straight up and down, like the most common and most probably perceived as normal or normative would be just allosexual. I like sex. I don't have to know the person super well. Maybe I really like casual encounters and I really don't have to have any connection at all. And there's space over there. If you go like kind of like to the extreme, and I want to use this in like very morally neutral language, whatever level of sex you and sexual attraction you have is fine, as long as it's not like detrimental to your health or your job and your relationships, etc. Kind of more in the like nympho or hypersexual range, which is just you have a higher libido, a higher sex drive, and you want to have a lot more sex than, maybe more people would consider normal. And there is really no normal amount of sex to be having because, as I've just explained, the humans fall anywhere on this spectrum. And some people, match up with their partners more closely and some match more differently. And it's just a matter of figuring out, what you need to do to have your needs met, whether your needs include like, I do want to try to have sex like almost every day if possible, or like I would prefer to only have sex like once a month, or like I'll do it if you feel like it. Like for non-sex repulsed asexual people, sometimes that is what they do. They're like, I don't really care about it. I don't really care about sushi, but like my partner loves sushi. So like I'll go out to the sushi restaurant. Like I'll go out, like we'll have sex, like not at the sushi restaurant. Don't do that. Maybe if there's a specific play party for that, there is a reason why human sushi platters are a thing. That's all I'm saying.
I think it's also reasonable to point out that our libido can change over our lifetime due to different things that are going on in our bodies. I'm thinking for women, there's a lot of hormone changes that go on. And yeah, so sometimes a person might have started out in the relationship and been very, wanting and needing a lot of sex frequently. And then as time goes on, and it doesn't mean that they are not attracted to their partner. But so this is also where I think super helpful for if you are in a heterosexual partnership, making sure that you understand what can be going on in your partner's body as they change. What happens to a woman's body when she is pregnant, when her uterus is like becoming gigantic and all these things going on? And then how long does it take after that for the uterus to shrink back down? And then even looking at perimenopause and menopause, what's going on? What used to feel wonderful can now almost feel like there's a cheese grater or something just going on. Like
your body stops producing.
Painful.
Yeah. We should talk about perimenopause and menopause a little bit. Like, I have friends, I'm 35. Like, I have friends who are in that stage. Like, your body stops producing natural lubrication. And so, like, I'll have friends or clients that are like, I have to buy lube for the first time. Like, I've never had to do this. I'm like, yeah, you want to go shopping? I'll take you to the pleasure chest. They got some good stuff over there.
Yeah, and buy a lot. You're probably going to be needing a lot of it. Yes, so thank you for that. Yeah, the body and perimenopause and menopause. There's just lots of changes that a human body goes through. And then also there can be other things going on mentally, emotionally. There's a lot going on in the world right now, in case people haven't quite noticed. And so some folks might decide, wow, I want the most pleasurable diversions from all these things that are going on. And then other folks might be, I can't possibly think of being physically intimate with someone right now while things are weighing me down to this extent. And so that's where communication comes in so handy. And we really need to be connecting with each other to find out how people are feeling and what they would like to do.
Yeah,
if anything.
Like stress affects the libido. It affects it in one direction for some and the other direction for others. So like trust and safety and vulnerability are required for like the communication that creates a healthy and mutually pleasurable sex life. And very few people have a lot of sexual communication skills just generally because our education system, especially sex ed, is broadly dictated by Christian morals, which tend to be abstinence only and generally not talking about sex unless it is in this like abstinence-based or negative framework. I mean, I think just it's so fucked up that we teach teenage girls that pregnancy is a punishment for having extramarital sex. Like, think about how hard that makes it to make a cognitive switch when you're like, oh, well, I'm married now and like I want kids, but like you like if it's framed always as a consequence for having sex, like that's something that I personally like dealt with. And like I don't have children. I don't want them. I don't want to deal with the changes of pregnancy in my body or the responsibility of another human. I'm already disabled with chronic pain. No, thank you. But like that general like absence and silence around sexuality. I mean, that's what I wrote about in my like that senior capstone project at Biola that I referenced. Like the silence on sexuality, especially for women, is like really harmful, and like it's based on like a very narrow interpretation of the religious text. Because there are plenty of, I don't want to say plenty, there are more permissive and less restrictive forms of Christianity, but they're not the dominant theology, and they are not what is dictating sexual education in this country. So learning how to talk about sex. Honestly, most of my job is teaching people how to talk about sex because that's so much of it. If you can connect with who you are and what you need and find a way to connect with your partner where you can communicate, hey, I love you, I value you, I'm attracted to you, and then be able to compare what both of your sexual needs and desires are and see where you can align and meet those desires, that's really the underlying foundation for everything. And that absence and silence is already pronounced in American culture, but when you come from an even deeper and fundamentally restrictive religious environment that really especially doesn't teach women about their bodies, or that it's okay to know about their bodies, like we are not given language, we are only given no until marriage. I'm saving myself. I mean, there's a whole there's like a whole running joke about how for Mormons, like about how like the poop hole loophole, like, well, the book doesn't say that we can't do this. So like, we're not technically having sex if we're having anal. Anal sex is risky sex. All sex has inherent risk, but if like, playing with different body parts where different bacteria are present, especially if you have absolutely no frame of reference for what safer sex practices are beyond, well, use a condom so you don't get pregnant. You're not going to know about like proper hygiene and cleaning and prep and UTI prevention and stuff that are all like very necessary considerations if you are playing around in an area that does not self-lubricate and wasn't necessarily evolved as part of the reproductive physiology.
Right. Yeah. And that was something actually that I did speak with my daughters about. So after I had left Christianity and had embraced the fact that my daughters would be hopefully enjoying sex when they felt that they were ready to be doing that. So I didn't want to deny them education or information. But then I also didn't want to go overboard to the point where they felt awkward or uncomfortable, with their mom. But one thing I did definitely let them know is don't, whether it's a finger, whether it's another body part, do not go from one hole to another hole. That is how you will get painful UTIs, and other things are possible. So we need to make, especially if you think of teens who haven't had a lot of sex education. They don't really know. They don't know all the risks that are involved. So teaching them about risk and about responsibility without moralizing and saying this is only good and this is bad. I think that's part of being a good parent, is being able to share these things with our kids. And it may mean their parent gives them a book or says, here's a podcast I'd love for you to listen to. And even just saying, as I said with mine, you can ask me anything. I might not know the answer and I might go beet red, but I will do my best to help you find the answer. And, we can learn about it together, just to de-shamify, because I know that's such a big part of the work that you do. And I did just want to say one more thing that is so mind-blowing to me. In European culture, I have noticed that a lot of the movies and shows, they don't have any qualms about sexuality, showing naked parts, but what they do have qualms about is violence, showing violence. And in the United States, it's the exact opposite. So they're really going to make a fuss if someone's boob slips out. But boy, oh boy, someone might be stabbing someone to death or doing something, other things. Chainsaws, like, there's no problem with that. So that is just an interesting difference between the two cultures.
Yeah, our entertainment is very violent. And there was a documentary a decade or so ago called This Film Is Not Yet Rated that explored this fun American phenomena where violence is like you can get away with a lot of violence in a PG-13 rating or even an R rating. But the more sexual content you include, even if it is like super wholesome, that'll bump you up to an R, or that'll get your film unrated, which basically makes a film unmarketable in American media distribution landscape. So I have no follow-up to that. It's just like, well, you're right. Our films are totally fine with violence and blood, but sex, oh God, no.
And then with the Project 2025 that the current regime in the United States is trying to enact, it's just becoming more and more burdensome as the Christian nationalists try and take control and force things back to, hundreds of years ago. If you think like United States was basically founded by Puritans or people they left England because it was not puritanical enough. So I think you're doing a tremendous service just by teaching people how to talk about sex and be frank about it, because it's just a part of life, and it can be, frankly, a very fun part of life. Would you talk to us a little about kinksploration for the purity survivor? Because that might be terrifying, or it might be exciting and titillating. So tell us about it.
Yeah. So I'm just quickly loop back to that Christian nationalism thing. Cause like,
Sure.
yeah, our country was founded by Puritans. There is a really excellent book called The Founding Myth, Why Christian Nationalism is Un-American by Andrew Seidel, Seidel, that goes into like, yes, we have that history. However, our founding documents, this myth that we were founded as a Christian nation is not technically accurate. And it's a really great constitutional history and founding father based book that is really well researched and written. I believe Seidel was a constitutional lawyer, but I forget it. That's not really important. It's just a great resource that you should read, especially if you engage with people who may identify with Christian nationalism, but be logical enough to have a conversation with you about it. But for kinksploration, for the purity survivor, I got into this, I don't want to say like not rut, but I got into this niche because I noticed that a lot of my fellow purity survivors were also kinky. And kinky just means that you are into types of play that are outside the normative. The norm and the normal, that's not what I'm talking about. Normal is kind of not real. But the normative is kind of like what you would expect to be like fairly typical. And I'm very curious about why that is, which is why I'm working on a book about healing from purity culture through kink, because the framework of BDSM,
which stands for what, by the way?
Yeah.
Would you tell us?
BDSM is a combination acronym, and I'll get into kink versus BDSM. Kink is like taboo play outside the normative, whatever that means for you. BDSM is the framework in which we engage in kinky play. So B and D is bondage and discipline. D and S are dominance and submission. And S and M are sadism and masochism. So it's a 3-part acronym.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I didn't know that. You just taught me something. I didn't know that it went into three parts there. Okay.
Yeah. And
so tell us more.
The core game mechanic, basically, because you are using this framework to, it's the engine you're using to build your game. If you are into game dev, video game design like I am. The core mechanic underlying all of it is power exchange, which is dominance and submission. And I actually made a video on Reels and TikTok last week where I talk about the difference between biblical submission and BDSM submission. The difference is it is a negotiated power exchange based on a recognition of mutual agency, autonomy, bodily sovereignty, and consent and negotiation, where things are generally very outlined, very clearly negotiated. They should be, otherwise you're kind of fucking around and you might be abusing someone without realizing it. Where, you're engaging consensually using that Fry's framework in types of play that are generally like outside the normative. There are plenty of softer elements to kink because the mainstream perception of it is, literally S&M by Rihanna. Whips and chains excite me. It's not all about whips and chains. It's not all about impact. Basically, you are in dominance and submission negotiating someone else being in charge for a while, and you can define the scope of that, whether it is like just for a scene or, kind of an ongoing dynamic where you engage with each other to whatever degree of power exchange you want to do, or if it's like an ongoing, like 24/7 all the time total power exchange, which is very, very rare. The mainstream representation of kink, fortunately or unfortunately, is 50 Shades of Grey. And if you have seen that, Christian is trying to get Anna, like for this whole film, to sign a contract, essentially giving him a total power exchange situation where he is the dominant. You would not ever do this with someone who was new to BDSM for many reasons. Like, she was a virgin before she even met him, and he's just like full send all of this stuff, which can be like a fun fantasy to think about because a lot of people fantasize about submission and not being in control. But if you were to do something like that, it requires you to both have a very strong understanding of yourself and experience in the scene, understanding how dominance works, the risks associated with a lot of different types of play. But I've found that a lot of purity culture survivors have a praise kink, which just means they like being told that they're good. And my theory on this, and I am really looking forward to, whether the data validates this. My theory is that for us, all sex was taboo outside of this very, very, very narrow context. Even when you actually do get married, it still feels like it's a sin because you've been told it's a sin, that you might go to hell for it for so long. And so a praise kink is literally just that you enjoy or are turned on by being told that you are good, you're doing a good job, you look pretty, you feel good. It's kind of exactly what it sounds like. And for people who come from a context where all sex was bad, even that is taboo, and that should be part of just a healthy sexuality. But kinks vary because the taboos across cultures, even within American culture, vary. Christianity informs a lot of kink because it is one of the 3 largest religions in the world. But there are types of play that come from Japan, which was never Christianized and never colonized by a Christian religion. So shibari has nothing to do with Christianity. You can absolutely incorporate bondage into, if you're doing some kind of play that involves, religious or ritual elements, because bondage is kind of universal. Specifically, Japanese shibari rope bondage is a very specific type of practice. There's also Western style, but for the purity culture survivor, the basics of exploration really do start with deconstructing from shame and self-acceptance, differentiating guilt from shame. Shame is, I am bad or wrong for being who I am. Guilt is, I have done something bad or wrong or harmed someone else, and it is much more justified and real. You can absolutely have justified feelings of shame in that if the community I'm in finds out about this thing, they might ostracize me, because that is kind of the fundamental function of shame in society, anthropologically. But it doesn't mean that you are actually bad. It means that you have incongruence with your community or your religion or your religious community. So being able to deconstruct from this idea, there was actually a really excellent thing that Justin Lehmiller said in this podcast, which was when he came out, his grandma, who's a very devout, I believe Catholic, took him out to lunch and was like, God made you in his image, and God doesn't make mistakes, and you're not a mistake. And so she found a way to integrate her grandson's sexuality, which was probably at odds with a lot of her religious teachings, into her religion, because that piece is true. If you believe that God created you, God doesn't make mistakes. Why would he create you in a way that is wrong? Why would he create you with a clit or a prostate whose function is only to feel pleasure? So being able to—
Way to go, Grandma.
What?
That was sweet. Way to go, Grandma. That was so sweet of his grandma to do that. Yeah.
I love that story. And in Dr. Morgante's book, she also cites there's now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. And she's so this moving away from shame while retaining, your faith identity or part of your belief system is absolutely doable. And I tend to work more with people who have deconstructed or are deconstructing, because those people tend to realize something is fucked up here. Like I was when I was deconstructing and realizing, I found the term purity culture. I was like, huh. But in terms of exploration, I know that was a lot of, there's a lot of context.
Yeah.
But in terms of exploring, if you're starting to suspect you might have kinky desires, part of that is exploring what you might be into on your own and accepting that you are okay at whatever level of sexuality and libido and orientation that you have. And that I say that like it's easy. It does take work. It can take years. It took me 15 years from the time I became a sexually mature teenager to realizing I'm also into girls, because compulsive heterosexuality is so strong. So there's a lot of deprogramming that happens. But as you're starting to explore, my favorite things to recommend are erotic fiction, whether it is written or audio, like Dipsy and Quinn have a lot of audio content that's either like story form narrative or like directly to the listener. And these are paid subscription platforms that have a lot of good content that is also tagged. So you can see like what you can start to see trends of what you are listening to and what you're finding appealing. And like there is plenty of like good girl content on both of those. And then there are, like I said, like kink inventories like bdsmtest.org where you might have to do some Googling if you're not familiar with the terms, but to kind of get you a sense of the flavors that might be attractive to you. Because it is kind of hard to find good educational, exploratory kink and BDSM content, which is why I talk about it so much, because I think the framework is so healing, because the things that purity culture denies us are so present. It's also very attractive to neurodivergent people who may really like structure and format and frameworks rather than just like stuff's happening and I'm not really sure why it's happening or what's supposed to be, or like it gives you a script to follow. And if you understand enough about the world of kink, honestly, it's like the world of D&D. Like it has these rules, these characters, these genres, D&D being Dungeons and Dragons. There's a reason so many D&D players are also in BDSM. It's because it's about world building and role playing. And the role being not just like, oh, sexy nurse, but the role is the role of a dominant or a submissive in whatever flavor of dominance and submission you have. I think the best resource I have found on learning about dominance and submission is actually a book primarily focused on dominance called The Heart of Dominance by Anton Fullman. I wish I had a comparable resource for submission, because the general idea and the reason a lot of people are like, I don't know about that, I'm a feminist, is because it has so much baggage around it where it kind of seems like you're just handing control over to someone else, when really you are deciding a specific area in which you'd like someone else to be in charge for a defined scope and amount of time. And so as a submissive, understanding yourself and what you are into and what you like and don't like is very important, so that you can find a dominant partner, or if you're a switchy partner, who complements you in those areas where you're both into the same flavors, because there's like control-based, there's caregiver-based, like nurture-based, there's protocol and like punishment, there's like pet play-based, like there are a lot of different flavors. Fullman breaks it down into 6 different types, which I'm going to pull up because I know we're running short on time, but it is such a great book and I love it.
What's it called again?
The Heart of Dominance by Anton Fullman. So he breaks it into 6 flavors of dominance: control, conquest, service, devaluation, nurture, and objectification. I think he's also the reader of the book if you get it on audiobook. And it goes into a fair amount of what both dominance and submission means. And I recommend it for both sides of the slash. And then the other good way to explore is to find local munches, which are non-play-based, social-only get-togethers in real life, where it gives you a chance to connect with people on a platonic social level, because that is the basis generally for good relationships and good dynamics, and for building trust and safety before getting into like a play space with them. I do also, I actually do a thing called dungeon buddying, where if a client is interested and local to me, we will do a vetting call, and then I will take them to a munch. And then if they want to continue that exploration, and I feel that it's like the appropriate move for them, like we can go to a dungeon. And I'm absolutely just like kind of a fly on the wall, available to answer questions, like facilitator in that space, because going to a dungeon on your own is scary.
What a fantastic, I think your job sounds like a lot of fun.
It can be, yeah. I also do personal shopping for adult stores, because these are areas where having someone to hold your hand, and that is very much how I see myself, is like holding someone's hand through like the self-exploration, the going out into the world, especially if you have a lot of baggage about how scary and bad sex is. Having someone to hold your hand and help guide you and be available to answer questions makes it so much easier, because you can't like heal from shame in a vacuum. life happens
Mhm.
in community, and being able to help connect people into the community. The kink community is so wholesome. Sex and Psychology had a couple episodes on it recently that I extremely recommend, because that community is so welcoming and so tight knit and so loving. The size of the community is going to vary based on where you are. Obviously, I'm in LA. Our population is 10 million people in this county. There's like a dozen different dungeons here. But being able to get into a community either in person or online, and there are a lot of Facebook groups that are very good for this. There's a Dom and Sub Learning Safe Harbor 18 plus is a really good one. And like being able to learn from other people and ask your questions is really helpful. Oh, I should have mentioned this earlier. I'm actually on the Real Talk with the Sexperts series that I'm part of. We're actually doing a kink episode for Kinktober, which is I think on the 3rd Tuesday of October. And that is on my Instagram, which is at IntimacyLacey. Like, I'm really excited for that one. We've got a couple of my kinky educator colleagues, and it's an open Q&A. You can put questions in ahead of time. You can put them in like during the Zoom chat.
Is this an online event?
It's an online free
Okay.
event. Yeah. All of our Real Talk with the Sexpert panels are free and live, and they're recorded and put on YouTube. Participants are not shown in the recordings, obviously, like that's anonymous, but we'd have like very lively chats, both like in like the verbal answering questions and discussing amongst ourselves, and then also with audience members like asking questions in real time and getting feedback and sharing links and stuff. So we're starting to get a little community, and it's really awesome. So yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah. And how can people find you? Yeah, all the different places, and the name, I know IntimacyLacey, and that's with the EY, LACEY. So is that what you're on? That's what you're under on Instagram and Threads and places like that?
Yep, my handle is at IntimacyLacey, LACEY, on Instagram and TikTok and Threads, and blah, 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 I know how to talk. And my website is IntimacyLacey.com, and I do free consult calls. It's just a 15-minute free check-in to see if it might be a good idea to work together. It's a vibe check. So yeah, I'm IntimacyLacey everywhere.
Yay! This has been such a fun, I think, and really helpful conversation. I would love to have you back again in a few months to just talk about some more things, and maybe even answer some questions from my audience. That would be such a treat. Thanks, Lacey.
Thanks, Janice. Yeah, I love answering questions. Thanks for having me. Thanks for listening.
Yeah. What a treat. And thank you, everyone, for joining us on this episode of the Divorcing Religion podcast. If you have questions and you want answers about sex, reach out to Lacey, because she's the sexpert. Thanks, everyone. Take care. We'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.